to DGMT's Learning Lunch. My name is Shimela Gyangi and I am your host for today. In this podcast, we will be looking at the exceptional storytelling of Embrace Movement for Mothers. Non-profit organization Embrace celebrates mothers and the critical role they have to play socially, economically, and politically in South Africa. They have adopted a very people-driven approach to supporting mothers as the primary, simple, loving connection in their children's lives. And a key part of this people-driven approach is using a storytelling process that sheds light on the stories of willing mothers to build solidarity within the movement. Now, this is an opportunity for you as our colleagues to listen in on the best bites of the Embrace work and to learn from their exceptional storytelling. In studio with us today, we have Rumbi Goredema Görgens, who is the operations manager of Embrace. Joining us via Zoom, Nonkululeko Mbuli, who is the communications and advocacy strategist at Embrace. Welcome, Rumbi and Nonkululeko.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hi, thanks. Glad to be here.
So, Rumbi, can you take us back to when Embrace started? Why was there a need for an organization like Embrace in the NPO space in South Africa?
Sure. So Embrace officially launched in December of 2013, and it was, at the time that it launched, the culmination of a lot of research and thinking work that had been done by the DG Murray Trust and other partners around the first 1,000 days and how you can create the best optimal conditions for a child to have the best start to life in those 1,000 days, which start at conception. And so the concept of Embrace was about layering on an extra layer of support in those first 1,000 days that isn't necessarily available or implementable institutionally. So Embrace began as a way of walking alongside parents during that first 1,000 days journey. And it started really from that research looking at a child's growth and development in those first 1,000 days and realizing how critical they are. From there, it grew into a focus on mothers because in the engagements that Embrace was having in communities, it was always with mothers. And mothers spend, on average, 270 days more than anybody else does with their children in the first 1,000 days. And so they have their finger really on the pulse of a child's development. But in speaking to mothers, it became clear that they feel often sidelined and pushed aside when we talk about their children. We talk about their children's brains, their children's development. We forget that that child begins and starts within the mother's body. And once the child is born, those first few years, children are quite bonded to their mothers, who are the majority of the primary caregivers in South Africa. So it became clear to us that we needed to kind of surface these stories of mothers and give mothers a space in conversations around childhood development and also acknowledge the existence of the mother-child dyad, that it's not really possible to talk about young children, especially very young children, first 1,000 days, without considering their mothers, because the mothers are the ones who are primarily responsible for their care.
There's a quote of yours that I really love that says, motherhood is something that should matter to all of us, not just to individual mothers. Embrace holds society to account for the lack of real social structures of support and services to mothers. And on that, I'm thinking about a previous podcast that we just did with our innovation director, Ginse, who was speaking about causal relationships. And she was saying that you can't look at a challenge like youth unemployment without looking at motherhood, without looking at growth and nutritional stunting, especially when we see the effect that something like stress can have on a pregnant mother. Can you go a bit more into that, Rumbi, into the causal structures or relationships and how, we can look at a mother as a key part of our strategies in civil society?
So I think we pay a lot of lip service in our society, not just South African society, but across the globe, to motherhood. Mother's Day is coming up in a few weeks. I'm just reminding you now. Get those flowers ordered.
Gifts need to start coming in.
And we spend a lot of time saying that we're celebrating mothers without actually digging into what it takes to mother, especially when it's your first time as a mother, and especially when it's a young child. Raising children is incredibly resource heavy, and a lot of the time mothers are saddled with that responsibility. So when we talk about all of the issues that we tend to talk about in this building at the DGMT and beyond, things around access to nutrition, things around children's access to early childhood development, children's access to schooling, whether or not they stay in school, how the gap between school and the next step is bridged, and what the wraparound support is. We really can't discount the role that mothers play at the beginning, but throughout, mothers facilitating their children's kind of journey through life. So I think motherhood, for me, illustrates this idea of whenever we talk about an individual and an individual's potential, we have to be very aware that individual exists within a community always, and paying attention to mothers and holding mothers where they're at is really about kind of buttressing or reinforcing that community. So we talk about how it takes a village. And I think we forget that the village doesn't just materialize out of thin air. There's a joke that went viral a few years ago, or maybe I didn't know it until I became a mother. Maybe it's always been there. But it's a mother who's saying, I've heard that it takes a village to raise a child. Like, so is there a number that I call, or do they, like, how can I get in touch with them? So Embrace is really we're trying to kind of encourage society to see themselves as the village, and where there are gaps in the support that we offer mothers to fill those gaps.
Now, I'd really like us to zoom into Embrace's storytelling methodology. As you mentioned before, Rumbi, you have a very people-centered approach. And as an organization, you are able to share the most vulnerable parts of the stories of South African mothers in a way that does not really make it feel like currency. We can see the sincerity, the willingness to learn, and to not see the mother stories as a tool in your communication strategy. How do you achieve that? And I'd love to hear from both of you guys, Nkululeko and Rumbi.
I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we are informed by the stories of mothers. So when we go into a space and we listen to stories, it's really about getting a sense of people's stories. So we're not just going to be mining the stories for specific details. And I think also what's important is that in those spaces, it's not just us. So we might facilitate a space, or we might sit in on a space, but it's other mothers talking to one another.
So as a movement, we're committed to elevating the voices and experiences of mothers. And I think it's this mother-first, mother-centered approach that informs how we share and honor these very deeply personal stories. I think as organizations have really woken up to this idea of harnessing the power of storytelling for campaigns, but sometimes the part where we may get it wrong is, and often unintentionally, is that it can be quite extractive, and the protagonists seem to suffer a kind of violence of erasure and are denied any real sense of agency and humanness. So Embrace has a manifesto, and it really forms the foundation of what we stand for as a movement, and it's born from the words of mothers across the country. So in our manifesto, we acknowledge that mothers, by virtue of their lived experiences and their daily realities of raising children, are the experts on motherhood and on mothering their children. And this is really our approach. And it enables us to see a mother who chooses to come forward and is willing to tell her story of birth trauma or postnatal depression or food insecurity or hunger during pregnancy or gender-based violence or whatever it is, as a co-creator and as an author of her own story. And when you see mothers as expert advisors on issues related to motherhood, then you recognize that their personal stories are, in fact, a resource that helps the general public and policymakers better understand the sort of broader national context of motherhood. I think also, very often when we think about consent, we often think about it in terms of its like legal and ethical implications. So whether or not someone, has consented to share their story, or what details they've consented to disclose, or whether they want to reveal their identity or not. But I think consent goes much deeper than that. And it's really about being aware of your own positionality and about the power dynamics and how they can impact the storytelling and the story that's told. And it's about viewing the act of documenting and then, sharing or disseminating these very precious personal narratives as a participatory process. So we acknowledge the complexities of motherhood, and by giving mothers and pregnant women the full spectrum of the motherhood experience, we're able to create space for more authentic stories to be told.
I love that. Thank you so much. I really like that you mentioned that we're all learning, especially with the Poppy Act. That's just well, it's always kind of been there, but I mean, it's brought a lot of panic in a lot of organizations, and I really want to zoom in more on what you think our responsibility is as organizations when it comes to storytelling. Like, what do we do when we are entrusted with such vulnerable information and vulnerable images? What do we do with that information, and how we produce it to the public? And also another thing is, I want us to look specifically at the imagery, because I've noticed that Embrace uses a lot of beautiful illustrations that do a really great job at expressing the diversity of our country. You guys do that really, really well. And that is not, but that is not something that every organization would have the access to, because as we know, illustrations are quite pricey. So I want to know how you work around that. How do you work around telling visually compelling stories, and also considering things like the Poppy Act? I know we said we don't want to just look at it from a legal framework, but I think it's important to just consider new developments like that and what responsibility that means to us as communicators.
I can speak to the Poppy Act. I mean, I think the spirit of the act is something that NGOs, for the most part, have been upholding. The spirit of the act is about making sure that you are honest with people about how their information is used. So if I click on a link on a website, that should not entitle you to send me stuff to my email account. It shouldn't entitle you any kind of intrusion into my space or any of my data, really. And I think the panic around the Poppy Act has been because we have, in kind of the technological environment in which we operate, we've become a little bit lackadaisical about things like that, about signing people up to WhatsApp groups, to channels of communication. But I think for NGOs, what it should really give rise to is kind of an audit of all of the ways in which we're communicating with people, and how we are doing so in a way that is ethically responsible. I mean, so for example, for us, our social media, which Nkuli will speak to, our social media is quite vibrant and thriving, and we get a lot of comments, but we also get a lot of inbox messages, and it's about being quite careful with, how we use information. We wouldn't kind of take something that was sent to us, or even something that's posted as a comment, and share it without being in touch with the person who's written it up. So I think it's just about extending kind of that spirit of being more vigilant about digital communications into the way we work. And I think it also means, in the NGO sector in particular, it's forcing people to look more carefully at how we use data that isn't like tangible data. So how do you use a photograph of a child, for example?
That's what I was going to say. That especially with organizations that work with children, it's a huge thing. So how do you go around that or about that?
Yeah. So I mean, for the most part, we don't use images of children because we are also specifically trying to not kind of pull focus from children, but we're trying to center the mother, often in spaces that have traditionally been very child focused. But we also are very aware of the stock images that we use. So the services that we use are usually ones where there are diverse images available. So we don't like to use stock images, but when we do, it's spaces where there's diverse images available, and you won't see
very hard to find.
yeah, and you won't see on, I better not, I must check myself, but you will not see, unless it's a mistake, on Embrace's site or social media, a picture of a disembodied mother. So you know the image, you've seen it. You can't see the mother's head, but you can just see her pregnant belly and her arms holding the belly, or she's holding a child to her breast and breastfeeding. But there's no
face.
There's no face. There's no head. There's no, we don't do that.
That's so important. Yeah.
Just adding to that, I mean, while we don't have a guideline per se, other than adhering to some, media laws and best practices, we are looking to distill some of our learnings, over the years. And we're looking to put together, some resources to help other organizations to, frequently come to us who have contact with mothers and ask for help communicating better with mothers. So we are including a section on visual language and communication. That's a way that we definitely feel that we can be of service in this space. But also Embrace is a network-driven movement, and we have moms in our network from all walks of life. And there's no singular or maternal identity, particularly in a country like ours that's very diverse. So, and I think this, is something that we obviously, pay attention to. So motherhood is an identity, and it's a social construct and a relationship and a full-time job and all of these things at the same time. But the current narrative around motherhood isn't necessarily representative of all types of mothers. And it's, evident in visual cues. I'm not sure if you remember, but in December last year, there was an image of a Black fetus that went viral. It was by a Nigerian medical student and an illustrator, and it really did the rounds on Twitter, and everybody was talking about it. And that was because it really highlighted the need for diversity and for representation in depictions of pregnancy and motherhood. So we work with a really amazing designer who understands Embrace's approach to capturing the nuances of motherhood, and who really understands the importance of us being truly representative of a national movement for mothers. So we're pretty committed to honoring these diverse and complex and intersecting identities of South African mothers.
I've seen that has been a great topic of conversation right now about the medical industry and how a lot of the time people of color aren't represented for different diseases, and this is also part of that conversation. And what I also wanted to ask you guys is that when you do receive these DMs of these stories that are really vulnerable, how do you work around it? Is it a matter of you guys sit down together as a team and decide that, okay, we're going to try and refer this person to this? Like, how do you work around your responsibility as an NPO when you're sitting with that story?
We're obviously a small team, with limited capacity, but we have an unwritten social media policy, and that's that every mother deserves a response, and we respond to every single mother. So, before, when, we did a lot of face-to-face, on-the-ground sort of engagements in community to build the network. But now, obviously, as a result of the pandemic and in the absence of physical engagements, we've obviously prioritized online engagements, and so that is a very key part of building this network of support of support for mothers. So we do have a referral system that we use and that we are looking to strengthen. But that definitely is our policy, to respond to every mother and to ensure that she accesses the kind of support and help that she needs.
What happens with public communication? What happens when you're writing an op-ed and you really want to be impactful in your advocacy, but you still want to have that human interest aspect? How do you work around that? Because I've noticed that with Embrace op-eds, I don't often see those vulnerable stories, but I still feel like I'm able to clearly get the message that you're trying to say in your op-ed, and I can still feel what we would call in journalism the heart of the story. How do you work around that? Because I think you guys have really mastered a balance in that.
One of the things that we pride ourselves on, and I think we've mentioned it several times now, is that our work is driven and focused by what mothers are telling us. And often when you're putting something together, and you want to kind of make the point, you want to impact, you need kind of bits and pieces. And we don't necessarily go looking for a story to humanize things, but often, and I think this is it's often the case with motherhood in general, is trying to make a case for something as a systemic issue is paramount. And so we find that if you focus on one story, it's very easy to dismiss something as something that's a once-off. So if you've noticed, whenever the media reports on like severe cases of obstetric violence where, for example, a mother's life was lost or a child was lost or the mother was left alone for hours, something kind of egregious and really appalling and like quote unquote newsworthy. They focus on that individual story, but the stories keep popping up, right? And there's an undercurrent, there's like a systemic issue that is driving this. And that's why, I think that's why Embrace is not about kind of pulling focus to one story, but rather saying, here are the bits and pieces and all the different ways in which mothers experience it, right? So if we talk about obstetric violence, for example, it runs the gamut from having someone conduct an internal vaginal exam without asking you for consent or explaining what they're doing or even giving you the result of the exam to, being physically assaulted. Both of those are instances of obstetric violence. And if you pick one and highlight one, you're missing the point that this all happens on a scale where certain behaviors and practices become permissible over time so that physical assault does not seem so crazy at the end of the day. But we have to look at the entire system if we're not going to get to that point. So I think that's one of the reasons we don't focus on a story. You'll often find we definitely will pick elements of stories, but we'll try to make it clear that this is not just one story. A lot of women have said these things.
There's so much power in that because that completely disrupts the newsroom, newsworthy tagline. Because I remember being a journalist, it was always about, why is this interesting? Why should I read about this? What happened? Like, is it something new? Is it a new case? Like, what's the compelling thing about it? And you always have to have this kind of shock factor with your news, and it always has to be at the hands of someone else, of a mother. You're using that story to shine, a light on the topic as a whole, which is, to a certain extent, when you do think about it, it does make sense. But then at the same time, I really love what you said, Rumbi, that it individualizes the problem, and that's something we're trying to get away from. That's a very interesting perspective that I've never thought about. Nguli, I'm sure you can maybe also expand on that as someone who is in media. What does it mean to have that balance?
Yeah, I think it's a very important balance to strike. So just like the example that Rumbi, gave us just now, in a case of obstetric violence, there is an individual, victim, there is an individual perpetrator. But beyond that, it's a systemic and it's a structural issue. And that's really what we try to drive home with a lot of these op-eds that we put out. So, every experience of motherhood is obviously unique, and it depending on where you're from and where you live and how you came into motherhood. But the reality is that mothers in general feel unsupported in this journey. And further to that, the barriers to a connected and thriving start to motherhood, is impacted by a range of things, by a number of interconnected things like your race, your class, your gender, your nationality. And a lot of our op-eds are about making the invisible systems and structural issues visible. And it's about sounding the alarm on the state of motherhood in general in South Africa. So we're really wanting to shift the culture that allows for mothers to feel isolated and unsupported. And, you know, as a movement, like you said, we obviously advocate for, you know, the recognition of the realization of this critical role that mothers have to play, you know, socially, economically, politically in South Africa. And making space for mothers includes policy change, right? Policy change that makes, you know, the path to parenthood less dangerous. That includes, you know, legislation to reduce maternal mortality, and to make sure that, you know, motherhood is not, or does not make women more economically vulnerable, or whatever it is. But none of these issues affects a single woman, or a single mother, or just a handful of mothers, which is very often the misconception, which Rumbi pointed out. And yeah, so it's systemic, it's structural, and it's important to make sure that people understand that, you know, using our op-eds and our comms pieces, and to make sure that these conversations are as accessible as possible.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's something that a lot of NGOs might have kind of been wary about, because, you know, you're really trying to get published
Yes.
in a news company, and you think to yourself, okay, what do they want? What do they usually say they're looking for? What are those journalistic values that they're looking for? Okay, let's do that to kind of get to them. But then in the end, you might be compromising your own values as an organization, and compromising the values of well, what's important to you, which is the people you're working with. So I think what you said is really important, in kind of having that balance and being able to still speak about those topics without necessarily always using the stories of individual mothers. I also want us to look into social media, because social media is one of those things that is as tricky as public communication, because people have a very low attention span on social media, first of all. And secondly, people like to follow or interact with the things that are funny. Honestly speaking, when you're on your phone at the end of the day, you're just trying to relax a lot of the time. Yeah. And it sometimes as people in the nonprofit sector, we find it difficult to maintain a level of healthy or long-lasting, sustainable engagement with our audience, because our content comes across as too serious sometimes. You know, it's not funny. It's not like that 30-second TikTok that she can interact with that gets 4 million likes, you know. So I really want to look at how you work around that, especially having recently joined TikTok and found a very interesting way to make content for mothers that still addresses very serious issues, but is able to, you know, use that comedic element that TikTok really thrives on. How do you work with social media and driving up your engagement with these serious issues that you're dealing with? And I want to focus, Ankuli, can you answer this one for us?
Yeah, sure. So multimedia content we use it as a tool to build community and to foster a deep sense of belonging and a sense of collective identity, and even to drive home some of these very hard-hitting issues, you know, in as light-hearted a way, because that's the way that people are able to, you know, stay open to a lot of these very high level, very, very difficult conversations. So Rumbi is actually our resident TikTok aficionado, and she'll be able to tell you a lot more about it. But I mean, TikTok is one of the top ranking apps. I mean, it's hugely popular, and it's growing phenomenally. But what we've seen, for example, from Mom Talk, right, which is a hashtag that moms use to, you know, share, you know, they funny stories, and they very heart-wrenching stories, and everything, you know, that they feel needs to be said about their personal journey in motherhood. And Mom Talk has really become a safe space for moms to connect over the joys and the challenges and the messes, the very real messes of motherhood, and for them to feel seen and a part of a community, and even to do like peer education. So you'll see moms doing like, you know, tips on breastfeeding, or, you know, how to put together a birth plan, you know, and they also use it to dispel harmful myths or whatever it is. But yeah, so recently we did a campaign around economic support for pregnant women. And there's a lot to unpack there, also because it's a fairly new conversation in our context. So it was important for us to package the information in ways that would be easily palatable, for lack of a better word, for audiences. So your guard's down, you laugh about it, but you're still able to get some of the harder hitting facts around, the economic vulnerability of pregnant women, particularly in South Africa. So we got some of our fellows to put together videos, some pregnant, some not, just reflecting on the incredible economic ask, that is pregnancy, and to highlight some of the, the lack of support. But they did this in very, fun ways, with great, sounds from TikTok and trendy music. And the response was actually quite positive. So I think if you can make someone laugh, they'll be more open to hearing you, and to potentially accepting what you have to say. But so I think it is important, if you're dealing with a lot of heavy issues, to make it as palatable and as accessible to audiences as possible. And so we joined TikTok because basically wherever there are moms, the movement for moms is going to be there. And it's worked out great for us so far. But like I said, Rumbi is actually the TikTok aficionado. Here's the thing to say about this particular tool.
I'm really not. So I think TikTok, the thing about TikTok that makes it different is that it really allows for collaboration and play. So you can use, Kuli mentioned those sounds, you can use different sounds, you can join a challenge, so it allows you to like vibe off of other content creators, I think, and you don't feel so completely like, oh, I've got to like come up with a whole storyboard and a script and a this and a that. And for a tired mom, that is very appealing. And so that's how I started. I was on TikTok as a tired mom. And then before you know it, like you come across a sound and you're like, I could do something funny with that. And there you go. And it's very easy to use it. You can record various clips and then merge them together. And like it's a creator's platform. It really is, in that way.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. That was that was a lot. That was a beautiful conversation. I love that you guys were able to take us on this whole journey with the social media and using comedy as a way to talk about serious issues, because I think it's something we do tend to get scared of as NGOs, but it depends what social media platform it's for and who your audience is, your target audience is. And I think it works very well for Embrace, and I think that a lot of organizations can also consider if this is something that they can look at, because I know a lot of them tend to rely more on Twitter and as like that serious, like hard-hitting, there's this hashtag right now, this just happened, let's jump on it, let's post content about this. But there's so many ways to work around content on social media. I love that you also spoke about how you can still push advocacy and push systems issues in op-eds without necessarily zooming in on individual stories. That's also something that's very important that I think as NGOs we're sometimes scared of, because we just want to really get published in these news publications. And also just keeping in mind the ethical value of storytelling with our partners and with our networks within our NGOs, that we're always keeping in mind of our responsibility to them, and building trust within that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Rumbi. Thank you, Nkuli, so much. We're sure that NGOs definitely had a lot to learn from you today. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having us.
Please stay tuned. In the next few minutes, we will be covering our takeaway instructions. Don't forget to gather up your teams and take part in today's takeaway. Now over to you. So a key strategy of Embrace is storytelling. Embrace believes that through the storytelling process, women who have known each other for years can discover details about each other that they never knew. Friendships can deepen, and actions and attitude can spill over to other mothers in the community. The storytelling process has become a much more important strategy in itself for Embrace. And this is what we require of you today. In smaller teams, share stories about inspiring mothers that you know from your own life. It could be your own mother, your grandmother, or somebody else's mother that you know. What made this mother special? Tell us a story about her that illustrates this. And how did she approach life in a way that inspired you? Another question, what about her do we need more of in society? And then we would like you to look at how you, in your work, can extend the Embrace values and recognize mothers as a pivotal part of your social justice work.